Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizers of Beyond the Rainbow for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's an honor to be here today among so many inspiring individuals who are dedicated to advancing the rights and visibility of the LGBTQ plus community. My name is Janelle Perez, and I currently serve as the executive director of LPAC, the only national organization focused exclusively on elevating the voices and electing LGBTQ plus women and non-binary candidates to public office. My journey to this point has been anything but ordinary. Shortly after being diagnosed with a stage 4, what was supposed to be incurable lymphoma, I beat it and decided to run for the Florida State Senate right here in my hometown of Miami. I won't lie, it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. The Florida GOP spent nearly $10 million to beat me. And despite not achieving the outcome I had hoped for, I've always believed in transforming setbacks into opportunities for growth and positive change. So I put it into action. After my campaign, I got involved with LPAC's board of directors and eventually stepped into the role of executive director. I was previously endorsed by LPAC and served as their vice chair, and I truly believe in our mission. Though the Republicans defeated me, my experience served as a catalyst. It sparked not just a movement, but a huge shift in how I approach advocacy. I moved from being one individual fighting for the rights and representation of my community to leading an organization that fights for millions of LGBTQ plus Americans. We've dedicated ourselves to supporting and electing hundreds of LGBTQ candidates to public office, ensuring that our community's voice is heard and our rights are represented at every level of government. So instead of an army of one, they have to contend with hundreds of people like me. So I really look forward to discussing with you all today, not just the challenges we face, but the incredible opportunities and victories within our grasp as we continue to work together for a world where everyone can live openly and with dignity. Today, we're here with Beyond the Rainbow, a project of the Curve Foundation, to have a groundbreaking conversation series that seeks to create an intersectional, multi-generational space touching on gender, queerness, race, ability, and activism of yesterday and today. Beyond the Rainbow seeks to challenge the possibilities and limits of queer representation as a path towards liberation. Today's conversation is part of Lesbian Visibility Week. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. You'll have a few minutes to introduce yourselves and give a short intro about your organization, but let's be mindful of the time. So let's start with you, Imani.
Thanks so much, Janelle. So excited to be on a panel with these amazing women. So my name's Imani Rupert Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the executive director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And we are a national legal organization, and we work to achieve and advance civil and human rights for all LGBTQ people and our families. And we do this through litigation, through legislation, through public policy and public education. We pride ourselves on being intersectional. That's not always the most popular way to do things, but we know it's the only way to actually do things. And so because of our work, we've been able to really spearhead a lot of the more progressive parts of our movement. And I'm really proud of that work and to be able to be on the team. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about the conversation.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. T, how about you?
Oh, Kibo. Is that, you mean me? All right.
Yes, I'm sorry. I did my homework and I read your bio, and your bio starts with T, Kibo. So I'm sorry about that, Kibo.
It's okay. Just checking. I'm Kibo Drew. I am the managing director of Queer Women of Color Media Arts Project, also known as QuackMap. We are a film and social justice organization that does quite a lot, actually, not only training and supporting and resourcing filmmakers from our communities. We also have a film festival, and we distribute films to churches, mosques, synagogues, universities, art galleries, so that we can foster discussion and understanding and awareness and solidarity among multiple communities.
Orchid.
Hi, everyone. My name is Orchid Pusey. I was a member of QuackMap. I was one of the inaugural back in like 2001 or 2002. I was a participant, but that's probably part of what brings me here today. But I'm here as the executive director of Asian Women Shelter. Asian Women Shelter is located in San Francisco, and I have been there since 2002 as staff. I use she, her. We have, as an organization, I'm so lucky to have the ability to be in an organization that has had a rich history since 1988, working with survivors of violence, primarily in immigrant and refugee limited English proficient communities, across the gender spectrum, sexuality spectrums, really since its early days, not something that sort of started really recently. So our work is to eliminate domestic violence by promoting social, political, and economic self-determination of women and all survivors of violence and oppression. And our queer programming has been in effect and growing and changing and evolving since 1991, really based on the idea and the reality that our relationships, our friend relationships, our intimate relationships, our family relationships have such a tremendous impact on our lives and on all the way up to the stability of nation states. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, Kimberly.
Hello, everybody. It's a super honor, first of all, just to be in this space. So thank you for having me. Kimberly Aceves Iñiguez, she, her pronouns. I am coming to you from Richmond, California, unceded Ohlone land. I am the co-founder and executive director of the RISE Center in Richmond, California. The RISE Center, a lot of times I just call it the unicorn of youth spaces in the Bay Area. We are a 45,000 square foot campus that supports BIPOC young folks 13 to 24. We are healing centered, art centered. We focus on direct service to organizing, systems change work. We have been around now for 16 years, which seems strange. So I almost started when I was a young person. And our queer work, our work with queer young folks has been instrumental to this community. We were the first organization in Richmond that really supported and stood in solidarity with queer youth in this community. So I feel really honored to continue to steward this organization and just to be able to work with these brilliant young people that keep dreaming up ideas that are, you know, beyond our wildest imagination. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, as you can see, we've got a great panel ahead of us. I'm really excited to start getting to our questions. So I think, you know, for many of us working in very public facing spaces like politics and media, we tend to struggle with our sense of identity, or at least for me, sometimes it's difficult balancing my identity. You know, there's times I've not felt Latina enough or not lesbian enough, even though these are things that make up who I am, but they don't define me as a whole, which makes it difficult to navigate. There's no denying that the things that make up our identity and shape our perspectives and experiences also deeply influence how we approach social justice, advocacy, leadership, given that we face higher chances of discrimination on multiple fronts. So how do you navigate the intersectionality of your identities as queer women of color while advocating for social justice in respective fields? And what unique challenges and opportunities does this intersection present? Orchid, do you want to start us off? And you're on mute.
Oh, just a tiny little question to get us started.
Go big or go home.
Um, I actually am a homebody, but I'm here from my home, so it's working out. Um, I, you know, I still remember when I first saw my first job ad for Asian Women's Shelter. It was the year 2000, and it was like green text on a black screen, and but like listservs had started, and I could be on the East Coast and see this job description come through my computer of this place called Asian Women's Shelter. And I read through the description and I saw all the things. I saw, support of immigrant families, of people with and without status, of people with no income and low income, of, you know, straight communities, of queer communities, of questioning people, of, um, a workplace that has a huge spectrum of English language ability, not just clients, but the actual workplace where people collaborate daily together. Um, I saw this incredible commitment to feminism, really grounded in intergenerational feminism from around the world, because it is everywhere, whether it has a bullhorn and a mouthpiece or not, it's everywhere. And that was what drew me into the organization from the beginning, just to try to apply for a job, to become a volunteer, to be a language advocate, and then finally to be staff, and then later to be the executive director. And I think that that kind of the support, the really intersectional support that I have received is what I want to give in my role now. I received it as a young person. I received it as a volunteer from a volunteer coordinator who saw value in me at a time when I saw not much value in me. Um, and then now I still get that from people. It's not like you become the executive director and somehow you are that humanless, untouchable, unhurtable admin person. You're still a person. And I really think that that ability to exist across some spectrum of our lives as a whole person, as all the pieces that make us up, and the pieces that have led to some of our vulnerabilities and pains, as well as the pieces that have led to some of our strengths and our courage, that is, I have needed that, and we deserve that. And I think now, we can give more of it back as we receive. So that's sort of the trajectory that I had in my mind when I listened to your question. Um, I I feel so lucky that I have been able to be in a place where that intersectionality hasn't been something I've had to sort of crawl and scrape and shout for. Um, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so that is very different. I know what that was like, and I know what this is like. And then I think because of the privilege, that privilege gives you some coating, some protection, some Teflon in your day-to-day to be able to withstand the rest of what's going on. And and then I think I can take who I am into the different places that might be less supportive of whichever piece we're talking about. And I have more support to be able to withstand those places. And I think that is also something that we give each other. If we accept, love, celebrate, don't oppression, Olympic our lives, then we give each other the cushion and the Teflon so that we can withstand the places where we really need to be to try to make inroads into places that are closed.
Anyone else? I'd love to, I know I called one person out and I'm going to do that for the rest of the questions, but I'd love to invite anyone else to chime in here.
I'm happy to hop in. So I would say, something that I think about is what it really means to be the first. And what I found myself thinking about is when applying for jobs, when you would be the first, is what it looks like when you are convincing someone, not just that it should be me, which is what we talk about when we are at a job interview, but that it can be me. And I've really been thinking more about what that looks like, that so much of when I was applying for positions, that so much of it is just putting this into the way that I talk about myself and the way that I do work as someone, as a different way of looking at something. And that's not something that everyone has to do. That not only is it doing your job in this incredible way, but it's convincing someone that you can do your job in this incredible way in ways that folks didn't consider. And that's not something that everyone has to do. So that's something I think about. Also as an executive director, one of the largest things that we have to do, we are responsible for fundraising. And a lot of times our worth and how we are viewed as leaders is really measured at that with that metric. And so we also know that now there's been a ton of research that shows us that funding goes down from individual donors by 27% when a person of color steps in. And so if you add to that additional layers of marginality, that number is going to go up. And so we know that institutional dollars, they are given with more restriction when there are people of color, when there are women of color that are leading organizations. So I'm saying that because it is harder for some of us to do our job by just simply being who we are. And so in the ways that we are able to keep up with our predecessors, what it means is that we're actually accomplishing something greater, even though it doesn't look like it. And that's something that I think is important to name. And then the other thing I wanted to just list is that I work in the LGBTQ community. And when I think about what LGBTQ, when folks hear about the work that we do in LGBTQ communities, often folks say like, oh, you must not experience racism there because LGBTQ people know what it's like to be discriminated against. I appreciate the laughs because that is not how racism works. And that is absolutely not true. Racism doesn't work that way. It's not that when someone understands the way that they have privilege and they don't engage in in other acts of oppression, or that's actually not that's not how it works at all. And that's something that we have to experience, not just navigating the parts of our identity that folks look to, but the parts of our identity that we hold anyway. And so that's just something that I think is an important thing to think about. Now, the other side of that is that, it's important to say that the reasons that we're good at our jobs, or the reason that I'm good at my job has nothing, like, I wouldn't say it has nothing, but it is not because I'm a Black queer woman. But what I will say, and I'm saying that what we can't just do is go and find someone, like say, oh, our organization doesn't have this person. Let's just find someone, because that's a setup too. It's not, our reputations aren't as flexible as our counterparts. So when you find someone who, like, a lot of times it's a young professional who has who's going to be great as soon as they're, they have all the support they need, but putting folks in positions before they're ready for them really doesn't help folks, knowing that our reputations aren't as flexible. But what I will say is that what my background, just like anyone's background, gives is a perspective. And because at the time that I stepped into this role, I was one of very few people that had the perspective that I had. So what that encourages is some different out of the box thinking. And I think that that's something that I've brought to the organization that I think is important.
Kibo, I saw that you were about to say something. So would you like to still add something?
Well, yes. First of all, I apologize. I'm having an allergic reaction to being on Ramaytush Ohlone territory in the spring. I'm in San Francisco and the flowers are blooming and they don't like me. But I wanted to say, just as far as like identity and intersectionality, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest at a time when neo-Nazis were like boots on the ground. And part of the organizing around that was coming to terms very early on, and this is in the late 80s, early 90s, of like, I couldn't just be one thing. I was all the things at once, and that's how I was going to move forward, no matter what space I was in. And where I drew strength from was both my Choctaw and my Black ancestors, particularly my grandmother, who one of the things that she taught me very early on was around not using pesticides on the land that they were working, because her whole thing was, well, what is that going to do to me? If it does that to the worm, what will it do to me? And so It was understanding that the kind of the least of us, or the ones that are held the most down or the most marginalized, actually have an impact on everyone else and are sort of almost like a clarion call or cry before things get worse. So understanding that queer and trans folks of color are in a lot of ways canaries in the coal mine. The other thing that she taught me, because she stopped eating beef because she made friends with one of the cows very early on, was that we all had a role to play within our ecosystem, within our communities, and that we could really, in that role, make change. So kind of like elephants or bison being really important to the ecosystem. They're keystone kind of species, keystone population. So queer and trans folks of color always being at that leading edge, always pushing for generations. At least for the past few hundred years that we have evidence around. And so understanding that those two things were always going to play a role in how I move forward was really important to me. So I drew strength from that, not being the only, but pulling from many. And also understanding things like queer Black feminism and queer Native feminism, Combahee River Collective, and what they said about if one of us is free, if we're free, then everyone is free, bringing that into disability justice work and constantly pushing that forward. QuackMap has a very much a co-director model. So we have an executive artistic director, and me as managing director is responsible for bringing in money. But I did want to point out there's a whole series of articles that recently came out about Black women's leadership, which I think is instructive for a lot of women of color overall in terms of the positions that we find ourselves in. And because we bring so much of ourselves into what we do, how that strengthens the work, but it's also can be really, it can be difficult for us in dealing with other folks around that because we have to bring our whole selves.
Kimberly?
I know, I feel like I want to say something now because we're, you know, I want to name that sort of, I have this amazing privilege to be working with young people, this particular generation, where I feel like there's been a lot of healing for me, because the young folks that are in our space, they demand to be seen as their whole selves, right? They do not bifurcate themselves, right? They are who they are, all the beautiful pieces of them. And, you know, that is not how my trajectory, right? I felt a lot of times too, I'm not Latina enough. Sometimes I'm not queer enough, or that sort of feeling of sort of when I'm in a leadership role, what do I have to leave behind? What can I step forward with? You know, but I'm also rooted. I grew up in Chula Vista. I grew up on the border. I grew up around my nana's dining room table. We had very honest talks about race, right? About immigration status. My nana was Catholic, but she also knew my queerness, right? And what it meant for us to be allies, that was part of our conversation too. I mean, I have a very large family. We all look different, right? So what does it mean to be more of a white passing Latina? And what is my job to challenge like anti-Blackness? What is my job to stand up for the folks who are actually not given the same respect and spaces? And, you know, that's what has energized and moved me in my work over these years. And really for me, like who I am and where I come from, it's allowed me to be in a space with primarily folks who are in their 20s, and I'm not, I'm like a Gen X leader. But to be able to say like the patriarchal systems that built sort of these nonprofit industrial complex, we don't have to go by those, right? Like we actually need to believe in our own intuition on how to run organizations. We need to believe in our own intuition on how to be in relationship with one another. We talk about love. We talk about what it means to have connection, right? We really talk about supremacy and how it doesn't belong in these spaces and how we need to keep talking about it if we're going to be collectively free. So, you know, and again, it is grappling with like I, as the ED, sometimes feel the most scared still because of that feeling of like having to take parts of me, my queerness. Sometimes I'm afraid to bring it to the table, and I'm reminded about the people around me all the time. Like, no, we have to be our full selves in these spaces. So, I've been in this work for a minute, and every day I'm learning, and I'm really grateful for the roots of where I come from that really has made it clear for me that we don't have to inherit ways of leading that are just so dysfunctional. And actually don't heal our communities. So, yeah.
Awesome. So our experiences as lesbians, non-binary, trans, Latina, Asian, and or Black, because we could be a lot of those things, queer people, in many of the spaces that we occupy, they might not recognize the nuances of our identities. So it's really important. And what I've always found keeps me going is finding a space for myself in the friendships and the partnerships that we can create across the different industries and across the different groups that we work in. So on the next question, and I'm gonna kind of change subjects, but not really. Addressing the issues of racial equity, economic justice, and disability justice requires collaboration and coalition building across various sectors. Can you discuss a successful collaboration or partnership you've been a part of that effectively addressed these intersecting issues? And what were the key strategies for achieving success? What do you think made it successful? For example, at LPAC, we work with hundreds of queer folks of color, and our organization hones in to amplify the voices of our endorsed candidates, ensuring that their voices are at the heart of everything that we do. Sometimes that looks like advocating for them, or sometimes it's just us getting out of the way to elevate them. I'm lucky to be a part of a group that values not only what they bring to the table, but reflects on the experiences, which we can center those experiences and reflect on how we can do better by letting them guide our process. We also motivate our staff to be at the center of innovative collaborations and encourage them to find solutions to issues grounded in their expertise and experience. I would love to hear from Kimberly. This time you go first.
Let me unmute myself. Well, when I saw this question, I was really excited about it because the first thing that came to mind was the young folks that are here in this community. When we opened, our young people were the ones that did the organizing, right? To really identify what was needed in this community. Like, how do we address atmospheric trauma with atmospheric healing? It was young people that really guided the way. We started in a 6,600 square foot building. Used to be Richmond Sanitation. And by listening to young people, they said we need something more, right? We deserve more than this. And in partnering with them, we were able to build a 45,000 square foot campus. This campus is 100% designed by young people. They collaborated with us on what it looked like, what it felt like, what they wanted to experience, what they wanted to hear. The mural that's on our building is actually indicative of RISE. It is a young woman. It's dedicated to our queer community. It is dedicated to all the BIPOC young people that have come before us, some of whom we've lost since we've started this process. But that collaboration, that nothing can happen for young people without young people, has been really critical to how we've designed this organization, the campaigns that we run. So, I think for me, it has been critical, right? That their voices are the driving force behind our strategies, our theory of liberation, and how we think about the future, right? And even, again, like how we design what young people see in the space and feel that was the most important thing to them, right? They're like, we're in places all the time. We don't see images of queer folks. We don't see images of that lift up disability justice rights. We don't see images of BIPOC folks. We want that here. We want to see it everywhere we go, right? That's what we want to see. And, you know, this building is beautiful, and it's beautiful because of what young people have made it to be. So, and if you listen or watch the media, you would have a very different impression of who young people in Richmond are, right? And so I continue to appreciate how they stand up and show sort of their creative brilliance whenever possible.
I love that, especially being a Florida girl where the exact opposite is happening here, and these things are getting taken down. Kibo, you want to go next, or anyone else? I don't want to call you out. Does anyone else want to jump in and say anything?
I'm good to go.
Yeah, okay. You want to go, or you don't want to go?
No, I do. I'm
Okay,
good.
okay.
Interestingly enough, earlier today, we had one of our meetings of the Crip Survival Network. And the Crip Survival Network was started by Sins Invalid, a local disability justice and arts organization, co-founded by Patty Byrne, who was one of the first to articulate the actual principles and politics and definition of disability justice. So this complete network is really around understanding that no one gets left behind, right? In an emergency or a crisis, it's all about those disability justice principles around care and cross-disability solidarity and sustainability. And I think that those pieces in building together is really the key versus one organization doing a thing. It's all of those different relationships, and not just the relationships in this moment, but relationships over time. Because Patty and I go back to when we were on the Women of African Descent Task Force at San Francisco Women Against Rape back in the 90s. So there's that kind of long-term relationship, or even Orchid, being a part of QuackMap, our staff being former youth participants and being with folks over time. This year is the 20th anniversary of our film festival, which is like, I can't believe it's been that long. And next year is QuackMap's 25th anniversary. And what it took to survive that long is a little bit astounding. But again, it's what are those relationships long-term? How do we build them long-term? How do we keep being a place that people can come to? Because that's what it's going to take to get us through whatever comes next, and even the current moment.
I wanted to add something as well. I think it's obviously really important to work intersectionally. We know that that's the only way to get things done. With our Rural Pride program, we go into rural parts of the country and we provide resources, and we talk about, we get to know community members and provide resources for folks. But the background of that folks don't always know is that we go in and we build relationships for at least a year, building with folks, because we don't want to be one of those organizations that comes in and says, this is what you need, because we know that communities know what they need. And so we want to come in and provide the support that you can from a national organization, but to learn from folks and what is helpful for their community. And I think that part is really important. But something else that I think is important about what makes us successful, and that means all of us successful in our work, and that's education. Because there are so many times that we are worried about being intersectional in the ways that's just performative, that it's not actually helpful, because people don't understand the issue when your motivation to include more people is to include people, not actually to move forward together. And I think that part is really important. And I was reminded this time where we're convened to talk about abortion and reproductive rights in our communities. And I was the only person that was there from the LGBTQ community. And I remember it was with Vice President Harris, so we were all a little bit nervous and just we wrote our perfect notes and we're shaking, like wanting to read them to her. And then at the last minute, we can bring them in. And so I said, you know what, I'm just going to be a real person right now. And I'm going to write these things out and talk to her like she's a human, because this is important that she understands why this is an issue for us. And what I realized is that it helped that we talked about, people think abortion's an LGBTQ issue because we're more likely to experience, and I just want to add a trigger warning for sexual assault or rape, but there's so many other reasons that LGBTQ folks are interested in reproductive justice. We don't talk about how we don't have sexual, like comprehensive sex education, and young folks don't always know what they're engaging in, and they don't always understand the risks. We don't always talk about the fact that the majority of the LGBTQ community are bisexual, and 80% of bisexual women become pregnant in their lifetime. We don't talk about these ways where it is very clear that these are reproductive issues in a very specific way, and also that everyone needs reproductive justice because everyone does, for all the same reasons. And I was thinking about that because when I left that meeting, there were folks that came over and they said, I didn't know anything about that community. And what she said to me, she said, you know, and I'm a progressive person. Like, I just always say reproductive justice is an LGBTQ issue, but I had no idea why that was. And we are often in positions where we are being performative, and we are working with folks that are being performative as opposed to actually doing the work. And so when we are being inclusive, when we are being intersectional, it matters that we're doing it in an authentic way. And I wanted to name that too when we are working in coalition with folks.
Yeah, I feel like I can I connect with that and can keep going with it from the collaborative experiences that I've had at Asian Women's Shelter. I think I mean, I kind of just want to add gender justice to the list for the question itself, because I just find that, like, deep, crude misogyny is so strong. The grip that misogyny has everywhere, in movements for economic justice, movements for racial justice, disability rights movements, immigration movements, it is so entrenched. And it is still the thing that I still feel like meets such incredible resistance when you try to name it and lift it up, as somehow dare you proclaim it be equal to any of the others that people are working on. And I think, you know, it's like women and femme people are still are killed at a rate by cisgender men in their lives at a rate that people just still don't know, because we just won't face it and teach it and address it. Domestic violence is still this tremendous, in most cases, leading cause of family homelessness, and even of single homelessness. And still, it's not, in most places, named as this essential part of any movement for housing justice. Employment and childcare, it's just these huge, huge issues of misogyny that keep people in our communities from any kind of opportunity for stability, much less more than stability. And so I think in some of our collaborative efforts, or some of even our conversations when we're deciding which collaborative efforts to step into and sit in and live in for years, it's like those conversations, I always say to myself and to our staff, I'm like, we got to think about this. This is community-centered, survivor-centered. What that means is it very likely won't be fun. This is not echo chamber work where you just say things the way that makes sense to you, to other people, and they nod or they snap their fingers or they whatever and tell you that they totally get what you're saying. That's not the collaboration that's reaching new people. The collaboration that's reaching new people, that makes a change in how the homeless system of San Francisco works, that makes a change in how access to healthcare is working for people in our communities, particularly women and femme people in our communities. Those conversations, you don't get that feedback. That's why you need each other so much. And you need the benefit of the doubt from each other. You need all of us to know when to go hard and when to be soft. Go hard all the time? What the hell? What kind of masculine sports model are we going for? I'm not going for that. that doesn't make a workplace that I want. It doesn't make friends that I want. So sometimes you go hard in very specific places. And with each other, where is your softness? Can you like find it and embrace it and love it in a feminist way or not? And if, in my mind, if you can, then you can be in those collaborative movements and conversations for years. Where meeting after meeting, you don't get all that positive feedback. You don't say it the right way that wins support right away. You have to work at it and craft it. And like Imani was saying, years of relationship building to get to the place where the collaboration makes a real change.
Thank you. So, activist and author Audre Lorde taught us that our silence will not protect us. And it's from this vantage point of outspoken truth that many of us here tend to lead with. As we all exist at the nexus of queerness and color, I can see that this has been a beacon of guiding for our leadership. I think we can all agree that the belief that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live single issue lives. So when we look at our collective experiences, it's not hard to see that our fight for justice might be all encompassing in order to deal with the complex interweavings of discrimination and marginalization. In every room that I go into, I carry with me an awareness of who is not representative, who's not represented, whose experiences are not being considered. And as queer women of color, we make it our duty to bring those voices to the forefront. But I find myself that when I speak to white cis leaders, it becomes really clear that there's a gap of understanding that needs to be bridged, because it's not merely about adding diversity for the sake of appearances, as you said, Imani, but integrating the different lives and lived experiences of queer people of color into the fabric of our decision-making process. This means going beyond tokenism to genuine inclusion. It must be deeply rooted recognition that our liberations are bound together. For many of you here, you're not just making space at the table, but you're reimagining the table altogether, ensuring it's built on a foundation of equality, justice, and mutual respect. So I'm going to start with you, Imani. Tell me, how have your experiences as a queer woman of color shaped your approach to leadership and decision-making within your organization? And can you speak to any specific strategies, principles that you prioritize in your leadership roles to ensure inclusivity and representation for marginalized communities?
I love this. I love this question. Like I said
Why I
before,
kept it for last, sorry.
no, it's a good one. It's such a good one. I was saying before that my perspective, it's not magic because I'm a Black queer woman, but that gives me a perspective that isn't always the one that we talk about. And I remember that when I worked in Chicago, I was at an organization and they wanted to provide therapy for a bunch of folks. And therapy is expensive. So they're like, you know what, let's have therapy. Let's have it be free for folks. You have to sign up for it. And then you'll get free therapy. It seems like a really great way to do things, except that it's in Chicago. And for some people, if you live on the south side of Chicago and have to get to the north side of Chicago, that might take you 2 hours on public transit. If you just miss one train and it's all over for you. Like we don't always think about the fact that folks can't necessarily take that kind of time off. We don't think about childcare, what it's like to get there. And then if you miss your appointment, then you lose access to this, not just that day, but because it's a service that you lose access to that service. And we think about all those things. But if there was someone that was thinking about this in a way that was truly inclusive and intersectional, someone that lived on the South Side, they might say, oh yeah, that's not going to work. Someone that had been a single mother, that they might have said, oh, that's not going to work. And that's a way to think about what happens when you just have people with a different perspective. And one of the things that I try to do is make structural change in the institution. So we know that adding salaries to all of our job descriptions makes it more likely that people of color will apply. And as just my policy, we give a range, and I hire everyone at the top of the range. That's what we do. You don't have to negotiate your salary. That doesn't make you better at your job, and that's not what I'm hiring you for. I'm hiring you to do a job, and if you can do the job, then you get paid as much as we can. And we recently done a pay scale where we paid folks even more than we can right now, and I'm just working to make that up because that is what our responsibility is. We encourage people to apply on the post, even if they don't. We say even if you don't have all of the requirements, we encourage you to apply because we know that some people don't apply unless they have all of them, and we know that some people will apply if they have none of them. So just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be there. We provide professional development for everyone on our team, and I will mentor anyone on my team on how to be an executive director. I said that every time when you leave NCLR, if you want to, you can be an executive director, and I want to make sure you get there if that is what you want to be. And I think that's an important part of not only just what I think of as good leadership, I think it's good for the movement, and I think that's something that we can give, and that's something that I'll say. And the last part I'll say about that is that we often talk about being, I'm the first but not the last, or I'll leave the door open behind me. But I don't always think that's the task. We need to make sure that our job is to make sure that people are considered for positions and for it not to be noteworthy. Someone doesn't have to be like me in order to do this job next. They actually can be very different than me. They can have, they should be able to have fewer qualifications and still be considered. And that's the part I want to be careful about. It's not just everyone that looks like me that has the background that I have, and it has the educational background that I have, but know that this is open for people just because they be able to do the job. We talk about, creating a pipeline, but the thing about pipelines is that they really only work when you're part of the pipeline, when you're already in the system. How do we get people outside of the pipes into the system? We have to find ways to create this access. So it's not just about keeping people in these pipelines and moving, but making the pipelines accessible to everyone. How do we get everyone in the door? Because if we want folks to truly contribute to social justice movement, we have to create robust opportunities for that to happen. And so we try to create as few barriers as possible. There's not an educational requirement for any of our jobs that doesn't absolutely need one. If you're not an attorney, there's not an educational requirement. And that's how we do the work there, because we know it gets more folks in.
Anyone else?
I just want to say something about representation. I think we need to talk about the quality of that representation. I don't just want, and I'm just talk about Chicago for a second. Like, I don't want Lori Lightfoot. I just want to say that straight out. With the carceral systems, with the ways that youth are treated, with the ways that the city is being managed. I don't just need someone who has the same identities to do the work. I don't need other queer Black Native women to be in Hollywood pushing the same system. One of the things that QuackMap does and has been doing that it's just starting to now have more conversations about is something called narrative sovereignty. It's who controls the story, right? Who can tell which story? That's authorship. Who's accountable into which communities, and are you being ethical in telling the story? So that's being non-extractive. And so one of the things we don't talk about that gets lost in the kind of inclusion, I think, a representation question is it's not just like who we are, but like what we're bringing to that, and the kind of politics or the kind of vision that we have. Because one of the things that we don't talk about very much is how we end up, because of our politics, changing the very systems that we're in. So if you look at film and how QuackMap does that, it's a very different type of filmmaking than what is the standard. So we're changing the craft as we go. And I think it's really important that when we're talking about having queer women of color in all of these different positions, are we talking about the same system, or are we talking about a fundamental change? And I think the fundamental change is the important piece. That's the change that's about the care that we have for each other and the care that we have for communities, as opposed to continuing with what we have the same as always. Because I don't want any young person to go through what I went through. And my whole life has been about, if I crawled out of hell, if I crawled out of darkness, then nobody else is going in after me. I'm going to pull up the other folks that were in there with me. And I think that's the distinction I want to just say of Orchid and Imani and Kimberly. That's the distinction. And I think we really have to be clear about that, because that is driving what we're doing. Like, we don't want anybody else to have to be homeless because their mom is being abused. We don't want any of that to happen, right? And that's the thing that gets lost when folks are saying, oh, we'll just bring these people in. It's like, no, we're really talking about making a fundamental, radical, at the root change.
If no one else has anything to add, you know, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists. You shared such great, incredible insight and stories today. It's clear how passionate and dedicated you all are to making a difference. All of your work is truly inspiring. So, to everyone watching, I hope you found this conversation as enlightening as I did. Sorry, my Cuban almost came out there for a minute. It's really important that we keep these conversations going. The support and the work that's being done for equality and justice is critical. If not now, like if it wasn't before, it is definitely now. But I do want to take a chance before we close off to let our panelists go around one more time and share their websites and maybe social media. I know that we are probably not on the chat, it's not going to be seen, but I want to give you all the opportunity to give everybody a chance to find out where they can follow you or visit your website so they can learn more about the organization and the work that you all are doing. So I'm going to pause myself and Orchid, you.
All right, thank you. So Orchid at SFAWS it's very straightforward, our email system. So literally, if you just want to pop an email over, you can. It's Orchid at SFAWS, SF like San Francisco, AWS like AsianWomenShelter.org. Our website is www.sfaws.org. And if you're older and you're on Facebook, you can do SF_AWS. If you do -AWS, whatever, you're going to find us. Instagram, same thing, same handle. I like hoarded SFAWS for like a TikTok account, but we're not doing anything on there. So just stick with Instagram and Facebook and just the website overall.
Imani.
Thanks so much. So you can find out more about the National Center for Lesbian Rights at nclrights.org. And we're on all the social media channels as NCLR, National Center for Lesbian Rights, or NCL Rights on all of the channels. Thanks so much.
Kibo.
We're very easy to find. If you type in Queer Women of Color, we'll probably pop up. But queer, QWOCMAP.org. Find us on Instagram, also on Facebook and many other platforms. And that's Q as in quince, W as in watermelon, O as in orange, C as in cantaloupe, M as in mango, A as in apple, P as in persimmon. So quackmap.org.
Awesome. Kimberly.
Okay, I'm not going to be able to do that with the rest of it. So if you're a young person and you're watching this, I suggest you go to our Instagram, not our Facebook. You can find us at Rise Youth Center. And then our website is risecenter.org, and that's RYSE center.org. And if you want to reach out, Kimberly, KIMBERLY at risecenter.org. You know, young people in the community that need a space, send them over here.
Amazing. And I'm Janelle. We're at teamlpac.com. If you follow us on social media, it's at teamlpac, and that's it. And it's on all of the social medias. So thank you again, everybody. This was incredible. Keep pushing forward. Keep doing the good work that you're doing. I am personally grateful to each and every one of you. And thank you again to Beyond the Rainbow and Curve Foundation for putting this together. Have a good one.